Hi everyone, today's video is all about adhesives and the different types of adhesives I use for different things. This video is particularly useful if you're a beginner because I'm going to explain why I use particular types for different projects. But I guess even if you've been crafting a while, it's always useful to see what other people are doing. Most of the things that I'm now using, I've seen other crafters use on their videos and things, so that's what's prompted me to try them. So hopefully you'll get some tips from this, even if you're quite an advanced crafter. So to start with, I'm going to talk about double-sided tape and red line tape. These are two things always on my desk. I leave them out. I've got mine here, a few here actually. Let's start with the double-sided tape. Double-sided tape I use for all my matte and layering. If I'm adding die cuts to a project and I want them flat, as long as they're not tiny die cuts, I'll probably stick them down with double-sided tape. If they are tiny, then I'll use liquid adhesive. But where possible, I use double-sided tape. The reason for that is you get less warping. Any type of liquid glue, if you're a bit heavy-handed with it, might cause your card to warp. So double-sided tape is a really good option. Most of my paper crafting is cards. So generally on every card, I'll be sticking down either a coloured piece of card directly onto the card front or a matte and layer, and I'm going to use this for that. I buy mine, I'm in the UK, I get mine, I tend to go to the sort of craft fairs that are on fairly regularly, and you quite often get offers where you'll get like 10 rolls for £5 or something like that. Pretty much every craft store sells double-sided tape. They do vary in quality, but really for what you're using it for, any type, even the cheap ones, would be adequate really. So that's the double-sided tape I use. The red line tape is the same thing, it's just a double-sided adhesive tape, but this is much stronger. You peel off this red backing and it's double-sided tape. Now, because this is really strong, this is what I use if I'm making any type of construction type project, like a gift box. When I'm making any of the Eileen Hull journals, if I'm sticking, you know, a lot of them you cut the cover twice and stick it together, and that gives you the front and back. You really want that to stay put. So I'll be using this red line tape for that. Now this comes in different thicknesses. And again, I buy this at the retail shows, but I buy a selection of sizes. This very thin one, a lot of the Sizzix dies that are for constructing gift boxes and envelopes and things like that, you quite often have a very thin flap that is what you fold to sort of put it together. So you really need a thin tape for that. So I always pick up a few of the thin ones. And then for things like the journals, where you've got quite a big overlap to stick down, then I'll use the wider. So for these ones, I think you need quite a good selection of sizes really. For the normal double-sided, I tend to just buy those in one width because it's usually just matte and layers or a whole card front I'm sticking down, so I'll just go around the edges. So that's my double-sided tape that I use. The next thing I use all the time is a PVA glue. My personal favourite is the Gina K Connect. I think with PVA they do vary slightly. Some are thicker than others, some have a quicker grab than others. I don't like a PVA glue that sticks too quickly, because generally I'm using this to give me wiggle room. If I've got a matte and layer or something like that that's really got to be spot on, then I'm probably going to use this so that it gives me that couple of seconds to move it if I don't get it straight. I particularly like the Gina K purely for the bottle really. It's got a really good fine nozzle on it, which saves me having to put this into another bottle. I do use the Sizzix Express Glue, and I quite often, actually, I've saved an old bottle from this Connect Glue and I've put some of my Sizzix Glue in that. The Sizzix Glue is a much runnier texture, so I tend to use that more. It's a very fine glue, so I tend to use that really for tiny die cuts and things like that, but for everyday things I do tend to use this more than that. The other glue that I've used a lot is Creative Expressions Cosmic Shimmer Glue. I really like that one. It's really quite strong. It's got a good grab quite quickly, but it still gives you that bit of wiggle room. So for PVA, I think there are so many out there, and it really is about personal preference. I would recommend trying a couple, because I've used quite a lot over the years. I quite like the tonic one. As I say, I've used the Creative Expressions Cosmic Shimmer. That was what I was using before I discovered this one. And it really is down to personal preference and, you know, how you craft. If you're someone that's quite confident, you do only need a couple of seconds wiggle room. If you're someone that's really bad at lining things up and you might want to play around for it longer, then look for one that doesn't dry quite so quickly, because that'll give you that flexibility. So for PVA, I would recommend having a look around, but I will tell you this is my absolute favourite, and I order mine from Simon Says Stamp in the States mostly, because I usually order about 5 bottles at a time, and I order from them fairly regularly. I have seen it at a couple of the retail shows and in the UK, and if I see it at shows I always pick up bottles then. So that's the PVA I use. Next on my list, let's talk about hot glue gun. I use a hot glue gun. Let me grab mine across to show you. I have the Sizzix hot glue gun. Now, those of you that don't know me, I should explain, I do freelance work for Sizzix, so this has been sent to me free, so I should say that. However, I do really recommend and rate this glue gun for a few different reasons. The first thing that's really important to me is that it's got an on-off switch at the side here. I keep mine on my desk. Sizzix do a really handy stand to put it on, and they also do those finger protectors, silicone finger protectors, which are really useful. So mine lives on my desk all the time, switched off. If I want to use it for a project, I can turn it on, wait for it to heat up, and I'm ready to go. My old heat gun didn't have an on-off switch, and because I have it living on my desk, every time I wanted to use it, I had to crawl underneath the desk where my power sockets are and plug it in, and then as soon as I'd finished, I'd have to crawl back underneath the desk and unplug it. This is great because it can just sit on my desk, and all I've got to do is switch it on and off and I'm good to go. So that, for me, I would buy it just for that, because it's such a pain having to crawl under my desk. Now, the times I use my hot glue gun are generally if I'm sticking down things other than card. If I'm using felt, I'll generally use a hot glue gun. If I'm making any sort of home decor projects, like if I just today used it, I had a wooden ring that I've stuck some die cut flowers, foam flowers, and some different leaves with card and things. I stuck all of those on because it was a wooden ring, and the foam I was using stuck really well with that. So for things like that, I would use it. I'm quite often, a lot of the projects I create with fabrics, if it's something I can get away with just using a hot glue gun with, I will, because I cannot sew. So I'll either use the iron-on adhesive sheets that Sizzix make if I'm ironing, say, felt onto some clothing or something. But if I can get away with it, if it's not something that's got to go in the washing machine or whatever, I'll just use a glue gun. So that's my glue gun. Next on my list, foam pads. I have a massive foam roll, which I don't use very often. I bought this online. 3M do one. This isn't the 3M one. This is a cheaper version that I found online and bought this huge roll. I tend to only use this for shaker cards, or if I'm sticking down, say I wanted to put a whole card front raised up or something like that, larger projects. So I don't use that very often, but what I do use day to day are these round foam pads. These are by Stick It. I'll put a link to them in the description box. I particularly like these ones because they're round. I get two sizes. Let me hold them up closer so you can see. I get these larger ones and then the tiny ones. Tiny ones are great for really intricate dies if I want to stick an intricate die cut to something. And then these are the ones I use for pretty much everything. So if I want to raise up a nested circle or something, I'll grab these. I like the fact that they're round because generally I'm using them to stick down die cuts, which might be, you know, all sorts of shapes. And I just find the rounded edge means you can probably put it closer to the edge or something. And what I also like about these is they're quite firm. Some foam tape is really spongy and sort of loses its shape. Once you peel the backing off, it kind of bends out of shape really easily. These are quite firm, so they do keep their shape, and I like that. And the fact that they're quite firm means they don't get too squished up. So these are the ones I like. They're not very expensive. I think they're about £1 a pack. Again, I tend to buy them in bulk when I see them at shows because you don't always see the round ones. They do a square and rectangle size, but I particularly like the round ones. So that's my recommendation for foam pads. Next is something that I don't use that often, but is what I consider a must-have, and that's a spray. This is a repositionable spray. This particular one is Hobbycraft's own brand. I've got Pixie spray as well. I think I've got a few different ones. Crafter's Companion do one as well, actually. This I use when I'm using stencils. If it's a stencil that has got lots of tiny areas, I'd rather stick down the whole stencil than just put tape around the edges, because if you're putting texture paste or something on, quite often it is those little tiny intricate bits that might lift. So I'll use it on a stencil if it's something that's really, really delicate and intricate. The other time, and this is the most common thing for me, I use it with the Sizzix stencil film. The Sizzix stencil film, if you're not familiar with it, is like it's the best way to describe it is like a thin vellum, and you die cut it to create a stencil. The beauty of it is because it's very smooth, because it's got that sort of vellum feel to it. If you're inking through it, your blending tool will kind of glide over it, whereas if you make your own stencil from card or paper, you get a bit of drag. So I use this with that. I'll spray the back of it, wait a couple of seconds, then put it on my project, and then I'll put paste through it or ink or whatever. So I use that quite a lot. The other thing I should mention, actually, which is washi tape and Sizzix Makers tape. I like to use washi tape if I'm or masking tape if I'm sticking down, say, watercolour cards, if I'm worried about it sort of curling up on me if I'm painting. But if I'm using a tape to hold down dies while I run them through a die cutting machine, then I use the Sizzix Makers tape. This looks like washi tape, but it's less sticky than washi tape. So of course, if you use washi tape with your dies or masking tape, the pressure when you run it through the machine really does kind of push it down a bit more. So you don't want anything too sticky, because even sort of masking tape that is designed not to be too sticky, with that added pressure of going through the machine, sometimes I've found that it does tear my card. So this Sizzix tape is a good thing to have just for the die cutting side of it. It's not that strong, and I found it's not that great if you want to hold down your stencil or something like that. I would switch back to masking tape for that, or normal washi tape. So that's washi tape. Next on my list are the types of adhesives I use for embellishments and really tiny or intricate dies. Fiddly little things, basically, is a good way to describe it. And I use 3 different products for those. And I'll explain to you why I've got the 3 different projects. The first one is Glossy Accents. This can be used to add a glaze to your projects. It has a really high finish and raised. So if you want to create the look of sort of dewdrops, or if you want to coat something, say you stamp an image of a character with glasses and you want the glasses to have a real shine, you'd put a coat of this sort of over the lens part to give that realistic look. Aside from that, this is a really good adhesive. And the beauty of the gloss finish is when you are sticking down things like the plastic little domes you get, like the little dewdrop type embellishments that look like little bubbles. If you use your normal PVA glue, when it dries, you'll kind of see it through because they're see-through embellishments. If you use Glossy Accents, you won't see it because this dries glossy and you've got a glossy embellishment, it will be invisible. So that's what I use for that. I do actually decant it from this big bottle into a smaller bottle that's got a fine tip. The standard bottle does have a relatively fine nozzle on it, actually, if you can see that. But I do like to have a really fine nozzle, particularly if I'm literally putting a tiny dot to hold down a shiny sequin or something. So that's the Glossy Accents. And then the same product really, in a matte finish, is the Ranger Multi Matte Medium. I've been using this for years, and I've been using this for if I'm putting sequins or anything like that on a project where I literally just want a tiny dot, I use this. And the reason I use this rather than PVA glue is that this dries with a matte finish. So if any of it seeps out, which it's quite likely to if I've only got a really tiny sequin, when it dries, it will dry with a matte finish, so it won't be so noticeable as a shiny glue. Ranger also have Collage Medium, which is kind of similar to the matte medium. I use it in the same way for tiny embellishments, things like that. You can also use it, this has a matte finish. This is also really good for sticking down things like tissue paper. Think of it like decoupage glue, really. Anything where you're kind of adding layers of maybe slightly translucent things like tissue paper. This is good for that. So those 3 I kind of lump together. I mean, they're all Ranger products, but I kind of lump them together because I don't keep them on my desk. They're just things I go and grab when I'm putting on tiny sequins or things like that. So these aren't everyday items for me. Next on my list is we're back to double-sided adhesive tape, but this time in sheet form. If I'm making, say, an Eileen Hull journal and I want to cover it with some nice pattern paper, and I've got a piece of mat board that's maybe, I don't know, 6-7 inches long, I'm not going to want to cover that with my thin double-sided tape in order to stick it. So you need sheets. So this is kind of the same as the double-sided adhesive roll, but in a sheet form. And I buy a few different types of this. First up, I have the Sizzix sheets. Obviously, I doing freelance work for Sizzix, so they send me these. The Sizzix sheets come in 6x6 sheets. These are good for some of the smaller dies that I might want to run through, like the Eileen Hull tiny books, things like that, because that will cover a piece of mat board more than enough for a sort of standard size big dies. When I'm doing the larger projects, there are 2 different options that I use. The next size up I buy is A4 sheets. And for A4 sheets, I've got a selection really. I've got some sheets that I bought from Creative Expressions. I've got some sheets that I think are from sticks to. And then I've got some that I've just bought at craft fairs and things like that. So A4 sheets, very useful as well. And then moving on from that, I buy these big rolls because obviously doing work for Sizzix, I've been making a lot of journals with the eyeline hole journals, and they're quite large dies. They're the long big dies. So this is A4 width, but it's on a roll. So if I'm using some of the Sizzix mat board, for instance, this is quite long. Does it tell me the measurements? Yeah, it's 13 inches long. So 13 inches is longer than my A4 sheet. Let me grab that to show the difference. So this is the backing of an A4 sheet. So I've got that shortfall at the end. Now you can put another strip on, but it's far easier to just do it in one go. So with this roll, I can cover one of these. It's much quicker. And you get something ridiculous, like about, I want to say 50 meters on these, maybe 20 meters, I don't know. I bought mine on eBay. There are a few craft stores do sell them, but this is a really cost-effective way if you're doing a lot like I do. If you're only doing the odd project, just grab a pack of A4 sheets, and you can, you know, even if you're doing journals, you can just put a strip on the end. But if you're planning on doing a lot, then it's more cost-effective to buy it by the roll. So that is the adhesive sheets I use. And then there's one more type of adhesive I'm going to talk about. Personally, I'm more of a paper crafter. I don't do a lot of mixed media projects, but I do like to dabble in mixed media. And there's a glue, well, it's not a glue really. 3D gel is something I use if I'm adding really heavy embellishments to something. If I'm doing a canvas or something and I want to add metal embellishments that are really heavy, this is what you need for that type of thing. I use the Prima Finnabair 3D gel. It comes in matte gel and a gloss. I've got both. I tend to use the matte more because, you know, if you're sticking metal things on or beads and bits and bobs, quite often this is going to be showing underneath. So the matte finish looks better. But sometimes, you know, if I'm sticking, again, shiny things down, I might want to use the gloss. So I've got both. Those of you that are into more mixed media things, this would be a must-have for you. For me, this is just something I use every now and then, probably only once every month or so. Whereas most of the items I've talked about today are things that I use on a daily basis. So that's kind of covered the basics of adhesives and the things that I like to use. I'll put links in the description box for as many of these products as I can find. One thing I haven't really covered, because I don't tend to use them anymore, is the sort of tape runners and the tape runner guns, things like that. Personally, I've used them before. I had that big pink one. I do use tape runners every now and then. I've got a repositionable one that is quite handy if I just want to sort of hold something in place. But on the whole, they're not a cost-effective adhesive for me with the volume of stuff I create. I would get through a tape runner a day, the rate I craft. So for me, buying cheap rolls of double-sided tape is a more cost-effective thing for me. Tape runners are way more convenient than this because you literally just roll it across and your adhesive's on. So if you're just dabbling in crafting and you're not doing huge volumes, then have a look at tape runners. But this video really is just about me showing you exactly what I use on a day-to-day basis, and that's something I don't use just because I make too much stuff and it would cost me a fortune. So I think I've covered everything that I use. Hopefully that's been useful for you. If you've got any recommendations for good adhesives and things that you think I should try, leave me a comment, because I think adhesives is very much a personal preference thing, and I'm always open to trying new ideas. If you've tried something that you think's better than anything I'm currently using, tell me and I'll give it a go. So hopefully that's been useful to you all, and I'll be back soon with another video which will hopefully help all you beginners. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you soon. Bye.